I sold my J200 to Charlie Pritchard, my Gibson. Yeah, I said, and that guitar is a lot of provenance because there's a famous picture. There was a band called the Even Dozen Jug Band in the Greenwich Village, and it was the young Maria Moldauer, John Sebastian, Stefan Grossman on guitar, and Fred Weiss on fiddle, and they had a photo that they took on the roof of a building in the village with one of those water water tanks. It's kind of an iconic photo. It might have been Dave Garr, somebody like that took the picture. But I remember there was a framed on Israel G. Young's Folklore Center. Even when they moved to 6th Avenue, there was that picture on the wall. And that guitar was a J200 guitar. That it was in high school, and I just I'd go to see Dave Van Ronk, and John Hammond Jr. was playing one that was blonde at that time, and I really wanted one. And I'd stare at the Gibson catalog in school when I was supposed to be working, and I got a job with the high school employment agency for $1.25 an hour minimum wage at dry cleaners, laundry, for a couple of years, for 2 years. And I got enough money, I went down to the village and Fretted Instruments, Mark Silver. And there was this J200 Gibson on the wall for $372, including tax. I gave him $250, and then I got a letter from him and said, listen, you still owe me some money, and there's somebody who's willing to come up with the whole amount, unless you come up with the money by the end of the week. And I went and got the rest. My grandmother wrote a check for it. I remember I went and picked up the guitar, and Mark Silver said, your grandmother's handwriting is just like Harry Smith. He was the oldest guy there, and he was probably, maybe when I met him, he was probably 29 or 30. And, Charlie was like 26 or something. Roy was 25, 26, 27, 28. Bob, I was about 19. I was approached. I was playing with Paul Jeremiah at the bitter end on like a open mic night, and we played, and I was playing my J200. And we went back in the dressing room, and Roy came in, and said, "I understand you're from Boston. We have a band, and our fiddle player Jay Ungar wants to go back to school in Kansas, and our guitar player Pete Smith wants to go and do something else. So, do you know anybody in Boston who plays guitar, maybe even fiddle and mandolin?" And I said, "Well, nobody but me." What he said was, "Do you know anybody in Boston, who could, replace Jay, who's a fiddle and mandolin player, and maybe even, play guitar too?" And they sent Barnaby to Boston, to 98 Myrtle Street, where I was living, in Beacon Hill, and carried all my furniture down 2 flights of stairs and drove me to the Lower East Side. And he drove through the heart of the village, the West Village, Bleecker Street. He drove down Bleecker Street, and I saw Charlie Chin on the street, and I knew him because I used to play like past the hat houses and stuff in the summer. I said to him, "Oh, I recognize that guy," and he said, "Oh, well, you're going to know him a lot better because you're in a band with him now." The gigs at the Unicorn, they didn't happen until we were already living in near Woodstock and West Socrates during the sound out days, because we used to drive in the Cadillac Hearse, the 1956 Cadillac Hearse. We borrowed a couple $1,000s to buy. We used to drive from there to Boston once a week and spend 6 days there playing, from I guess it'd be Tuesday to Sunday. We'd go back on maybe Sunday night. Monday, we'd be back there, for a day, and then drive back to Boston. The first week we opened for Taj Mahal, and then the next week was Linda Ronstadt and the Stone Ponies. I think the first record date I did, when I had officially, left Cat Mother, because the first guitar player, they were still living on 10th Street and First Avenue, in the house that Michael Jeffries got us. And I moved out, and they hired a guitar player. He was a very good guitar player, and he'd been playing with Wilson Pickett. That's right. Yeah, and he was I don't remember the guy's name, but I remember that he was very quiet, and when he wrote, I remember, he would write letters to his mother a lot and stuff like that, and I didn't know him very well. But he went and moved into my room in the basement there. He might have been a Southern guy. He had long hair and a mustache. He played well. I don't remember his name. I guess he didn't fit in, or he wasn't happy. Jay Ungar and I went with record advance money for Albie and Dubois to Poughkeepsie to a used car lot, and we bought 2 Volkswagen buses one day. And Jay had worked in a Volkswagen dealership and, knew something about him. And we put a new engine in his. And we put a new engine in Jay's, and then that seized on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And that was Jay and Lynn and I and their dog. And we got towed to a little place in Pennsylvania, and we put a second engine in that Volkswagen bus because Jay had forgotten to plug one vacuum advance hose. And then we drove to Kansas, to Manhattan, Kansas, where, they had lived and when he was going to school. When we got to Manhattan, Kansas, we had a gig booked in Manhattan, Kansas for Cat Mother, and the tickets hadn't been selling that well. And the guy asked us if we could stick around for a couple of weeks to get more, interest in the show. And I remember Lynn got her old job at the Chinese restaurant back. And they had this guy with a pigtail in the back room who was getting shipments of opium from the old country. And he would be asleep in the kitchen in the back. They had the bandsaw that they cut meat with, and with a little platform on it. And he would be taking a nap with his hands on the platform right next to the blade. I went to the Kansas City airport because, one of the things is that I remember I bought an amplifier. I bought an old Fender Concert, I think, with 410s. And I think I flew with that to San Francisco. I probably used it, and on the record, Pacific High. I flew to California, to do this was to do the Albion Duo record, that trip with Jay was on our way out to California to do, and we went out to California and we played, we played Winterland or the Family Dog, I think. The way I got my gig in Sha Na Na to begin with was I was with Billy Schwartz, who became Billy Cross in the Rolling Thunder Review, playing guitar player. And we knew him from the Electric Circus. They had a band, some Columbia kids had a band called Meat, M-E-A-T. And the bass player was Rob Rothstein, who became Rob Stoner, Rolling Thunder Review, and, et cetera, and, played on American Pie and things. And Billy was the guitar player. And he was great. He was a real good friend. And what happened was, after I left Cat Mother, I was hanging out with Billy and playing in the city, and we said, why don't we go to California and reform Cat Mother as a super group, both of us. Violin, mandolin, guitar, you play guitar. And we had, I remember we were in Connecticut, we were at Bob's father-in-law's house, Dr. Elliott, and he was a very wealthy doctor. But then I ended up, when I got arrested with Billy Cross on the New Jersey Turnpike on the day we were leaving for Elk, in Bob Smith's, we were in Bob Smith's Volkswagen bus with California plates. And we had been up at his father-in-law's house, and I knew that, the vehicle had been on the Lower East Side and stuff. So what we did was we hosed, I figured I didn't want to get, arrested or anything, which is what we ended up doing because they planted dope on us. But it's another story. We ended up hosing down the inside of the car to the point where it wouldn't even start because the wires were so wet. We had to dry it out, and you had the doors open, and, Because we were trying, and then we loaded all of our amplifiers and our equipment, and everything, it was a couple $1,000 worth of shit, at that time. Include, instruments, Les Paul, guitar, amplifiers, and then we got stopped, and then we ended up in the Hudson County Jail for a while, and we finally drove. Trying to think how we got the bus back to Bob. We never made it to California in 1970 to reform, the band as a super group. Well, Billy Schwartz had just been playing lead guitar with Sha Na Na. He had just had the gig. He was on the gig, and he had just left the gig to go form the super group of Cat Mother in California with me. And he persuaded them that they should maybe try the two of us, that we've been playing a lot together. At the same time, we were still settling all the legal shit from being in jail. And I remember Billy and I went from the public defender's office in Hoboken or Jersey City out to the airport in Long Island and flew to our first gig that we both played on with Sha Na Na. And that was at the mansion of the Ford Motor Company, their daughter's debutante party, and it was on Grosse Pointe Boulevard, Grosse Pointe, Michigan. We flew to that gig, and the other society orchestra on the bill was the Meyer Davis Orchestra, which is, there's there's a million. You go to your local phone book, and there'll be a Lester Landon. Not necessarily Lester's going to be there, but this was Meyer Davis himself was conducting. So I went up to him with my hair greased back, and I said, "Listen, I have. Could I sit in with you? I have a violin." And he said, "You got a tuxedo?" I said, "No, but I've got a violin." He said, "My boy, let me give you a piece of advice. In this business, a tuxedo is a lot more important than a violin." We played that gig, and then, I don't know, after a while, they decided they just wanted me. I did it for a year, and they had a manager, Ed Goodgold, and we played the Fillmore West twice, the Fillmore East twice. We played a weekend, 2 nights with opening for the Mothers of Invention. We did that, and we also did another one. There was a TV show, was called Live at the Fillmore East, and it was originally on I think Channel 11 or Channel 13 maybe in New York City, and it was Live at the Fillmore East, and the show was Bill Graham as the host, with him talking in between introducing bands and stuff, and it was Van Morrison with my friend John Platania, who wrote the music for Domino. It was Van Morrison with his original band, Albert King, the Allman Brothers, although they didn't allow the footage to be used. They were there at the show. And the Byrds with Clarence White. And not Cat Mother, Sha Na Na. And there was one other band, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Captain Beefheart or something. And, I jumped off the stage of the Fillmore and so on film. I remember when I was building my house, my kid was about 5 years old, and we didn't have electricity in the house yet, but the mason who had done the foundation, he had the time for us to build the chimney, which I'm sitting in front of. We had an artesian well. It was drilled, and there was an overflow, so we had water to mix the cement with, and we would leave a kerosene heater in the house to keep the mortar from being too cold at night. Okay, the mason had a brother-in-law who was a garbage truck driver in New Jersey, and he was up for the weekend visiting, and he came by here, to the job that we were doing, and he said, listen, I brought this videotape, man. You got to see this thing at the Fillmore East with all, and he mentions all the bands, and he says, and you got this guy who plays guitar with Sha Na Na. He jumps right off the stage, like he looks like he's going to eat the camera. And I looked at him, and I said, and my kid was like 4 or 5, I said to Kenny, I said, can we eat lunch at your house So we went over to his house, and we were eating lunch, and they put the film on. And there was the thing with me jumping off the stage, playing Walk Don't Run. With the original footage, which I have another, I actually lent it to a guy, and I got to get it back. But there was, years ago, they started publishing the films that were made at the Bill Graham, at the Fillmore. They've got them all archived, and you can look at them. But that's the one that I have a copy of, and it's just a fixed camera, from a distance, and you see me jump off the stage and get back on the stage, and, so it's not the same footage that they showed on TV, but I just remember my kid looking at the camera, looking at the thing, and he looked at me and he said, "What's that man doing, Daddy?" And I remember saying to him, I said, "That's me," and he looked at me like, "Come on," like this, like, geez, how dumb do you think I am? And now he's got a 3.5-year-old. I still have my Mendocino Cardinals, rugby shirt. I visited, I think, I went that one time when I was almost in a plane crash from San Francisco with Sha Na Na. We had been playing at Fillmore West, and all those guys were Columbia guys, so they had to go back to school on Monday. So we got at San Francisco Airport, we got on a plane, and they announced about 5 minutes after we took off that the landing gear on one side wouldn't retract, and that we were going to dump fuel in San Francisco Bay, which we did. As soon as we landed, because the landing gear wouldn't retract, the plane tipped over and the wingtip started sending out sparks, and we started going around in circles on the foam, which is very slippery, until we came to a halt, right? And then we, were evacuated, and we went in the airport, and some of those guys just booked a flight on the next plane to New York City because they had to be in class at Columbia. Bruno Clark, the bass player, and I and another guy, we said, well, that's all the flying I'm doing today. And I said, well, Cat Mother's up in Mendocino. Let's go get a bus. And we went and we got a bus to, we told them we wanted to go to, I don't know if it was Fort Bragg. How far is Fort Bragg from Elk? I think maybe we got to Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg would be before Elk, right? We had told the bus driver that we were going to Elk, but he let us off and he said, well, this is the end of the line. This is as far as we go. And we went out and stuck our thumbs out. And there weren't any cars at all. There was no cars at all. It was dead silent. So we put our thumbs out, and down the road comes this old Chevy pickup truck. Painted, I think it was painted bright red. And the guy driving the truck was Jay Moss from the Pablo Light Show from 7 Bleecker Street next door to Michael's. And he was with the, he was in Elk, but for some reason he was there, and he, we put our thumbs out, and he said, hey, hop in the back, and we hopped in the bed of the truck and gave something to smoke, and we drove to Elk. We never saw another automobile.